Joining me now is Peter Strzok, who served as an FBI counterintelligence officer for decades, rising to become the deputy of its counterintelligence division. His new book is Compromised: Counterintelligence and the Threat of Donald J. Trump. Welcome. Thank you very much. It's good to meet you. The Attorney General now has really lambasted career prosecutors, saying they're receiving too much deference rather than the politically appointed leaders who could be held accountable at the ballot box, and that he's considering charging protesters with sedition. So there's a lot there. Let's talk about the prosecutors first. What is your reaction to that?
Well, Andrea, thanks for having me. And what a horrible, disingenuous statement from the Attorney General about the thousands of women and men who work for him at the Department of Justice. I read some of his comments, and he spends a lot of time talking about the political basis of his authority, but he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about legitimacy of that power. You know, I spent over 20 years working side by side with countless prosecutors, pursuing the truth in a blind and apolitical manner. And when I see people who are quitting and leaving the Department of Justice, they're not doing that based on any political agenda. They're doing it because they're officers of the court. They're doing it whether it's the 4 attorneys on the Stone prosecution, the lead prosecutor, or Mike Flynn. Recently, if you believe the reporting, the deputy of John Durham and the work that they're doing. They're not doing it out of a political agenda, certainly not acting as children. They're doing it because what they see is the unacceptable politicization of the Department of Justice, and that the law is no longer being applied blindly. So for him to make comments like that is astoundingly bad and inaccurate, and he should know better.
I want to ask you about Russia. Obviously, that's the main focus of your book and your concerns about the president being compromised. But just today, we're seeing this playing out on Capitol Hill. As you well know, there is an annual threat hearing that is always being held in the House and the Senate, usually in February, and that didn't take place this year. This year, it's been delayed. It's only being held on the House side today, and nobody from CIA, DNI, NSA, DEA, the FBI director is there, and the head of the Counterterrorism Center is there, but none of the top intelligence officials. And this comes as there's an op-ed today from the former director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, writing today that Congress should establish a bipartisan commission to monitor voting and ensure that laws and regulations are followed. The concern is principally about Russia and Russian interference, which has not been focused on in the written statements from the DNI. They focus on China and Iran and sort of analogize that all of them are in the same category. But that's not what Chris Wray had to say. Take a look at this during the testimony today.
We certainly have seen very active efforts by the Russians to influence our election in 2020 through what I would call more the malign foreign influence side of things. Social media, use of proxies, state media, online journals, et cetera, an effort to both sow divisiveness and discord. And I think the intelligence community has assessed this publicly, primarily to denigrate Vice President Biden and what the Russians see as kind of an anti-Russian establishment.
But the intelligence officials have been downplaying the Russian threat. What do you see going on there?
Well, these briefings are critical. I've spent innumerable hours preparing both Director Comey and Director Mueller before him for these briefings. Congressional oversight in these hearings play a critical role for 2 reasons. One, they inform the public's understanding about the truth of what is going on and facing America from a global threat perspective. The other thing they do is provide a means for oversight, a mechanism for Congress to ask hard questions to make sure that the government and the U.S. intelligence community is telling the truth and that they're focused on the right threats and things that are in front of us. Now think about what you just showed, what the director of the FBI said. Here's the director of the FBI telling Congress today that Russia is actively interfering in our investigations for the purpose to hurt former Vice President Biden. How is that possibly acceptable? How does that not merit some sort of response from this administration to tell them to stop, to disrupt this behavior? That may be going on behind the scenes, but that's the sort of attack that's fundamentally not something any American should stand for, and we need to be hearing more out of the administration to stop that behavior.
Now, your book is called Compromised. You believe President Trump is compromised by the Russians. You make the point of the way he talked to Lavrov and Kislyak in the Oval Office, and the whole issue of Comey's firing, what he said to Lester Holt. But there was no proof established by the Mueller investigation.
Well, that's not quite true, Andrea. I think the Mueller investigation said that they were unable to prove to a legal standard or bring criminal charges that something had occurred. But they point throughout the report to a variety of deep counterintelligence concerns. When you add that to the recent bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee report, almost 1,000 pages from a Republican-led Senate committee, laying out all these counterintelligence concerns, the data is too great to ignore. So yes, I believe that the president is compromised by the Russians, and I think that takes a lot of form. I think it comes through financial entanglements that he is fighting to become known, that the Russians know about and can hold over him. I also think it comes from the way they're able to play into his ego and his strange fascination and coziness with dictators and authoritarians around the world.
Now, I remember talking in 2017, in the summer of 2017, to a former Intel official who said that follow the money was going to be the mantra, and that the investigation that had been started by the FBI into Donald Trump and his dealings, his financial dealings, would mean that the FBI would have his taxes, would follow the money to Russia, would find out about the Trump-Moscow efforts, and they did find out that Michael Cohen had lied about the timeline of when the Trump-Moscow negotiations stopped, because they did continue during the campaign, all of that. Yet Rod Rosenstein seems to have walled all of that off. Are you surprised that there was no follow-up on the money entanglements that might have led to compromise of the president?
Well, clearly in my mind that following the money is the key to understanding any sort of leverage the Russians might hold over the president. I did not experience, certainly from the Deputy Attorney General, any limitation on what I was doing when I was setting up the FBI component of the Special Counsel's office. Doing that sort of financial investigation that you talk about would be a massive undertaking. I mean, probably one of the biggest counterintelligence investigations in the FBI's history. I left before that really got up and running, so I don't know what happened. It may well be effort that continues maybe to this day involving all the intelligence community, but I'm concerned that had that happened, I would have expected to have heard about it somewhere, that there would have been discussions or protests out of the president or his attorneys about turning over financial documents, much like we see them doing today. So while I don't know whether it was done or not, I have a lot of concern that that was never pushed through to its logical conclusion and done in a comprehensive way.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.